Well, it's that time of the year. We're still some hunting stuff going on. So there'll be some January hunting rules, wintertime hunting rules, we'll call it. Really, we're transferring over to that habitat time, and I hope you guys like that. I know there's people on the channel that purely come for hunting. There's people that purely come for habitat, maybe a little bit of combination of both. And so we can't please everybody every month of the year, but I try to follow what people are doing in the whitetail woods at that time of the year, whether it's shed season, camera season, mock scrape season. There's always something going on. We try to hit it by the timing. And that brings us up to deer bedding and building deer bedding. A lot of people, when it gets to the end of the season, we get hundreds of calls about coming to client properties, potential client visits. We're scheduled right now pretty full out through May, June, somewhere in that range. And we know where we're at every month and all the way through September. And deer bedding is a big thing because people see their empty wood lots right now. They're not holding a lot of deer. If you have great food, but you don't have adequate cover, then you're not going to have any deer either. The deer will stay on your neighbors, come over at night and eat your food source. So that's a problem. So it comes down to building bedding areas. Well, if you just look at how to build a bedding area online, there's a lot of stuff that comes up that's very site specific. So someone will say you have to do it this way, and if you don't do it this way, it's not going to work. Well, that might have worked for their little Michigan property or Northern Ohio property or Indiana property, but that might not transfer to a big wooded area in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, northern Minnesota, or a big open grassy area that you have to convert to deer bedding. So there's a lot of ways to skin a cat when it comes to deer bedding, and we're going to talk about these top 5 right here, and I think that fits a lot of areas. When I go to a client property, I don't go in there with saying you're going to have to do this, this, this. I go in there, interview the client, talk about what's working in the neighborhood, and I try to match what they need on their specific land to the local habitat that they actually have and what's going on in the neighborhood. So it's a puzzle every time. We're going to go through these top 5. I'm not saying these are the only top 5. These are the only 5 ways to build a bedding. There's combinations of these. There's sometimes I'm using 2 or 3 of these or 4 on one parcel, a parcel with a lot of diversity, which is always best. What's interesting, before we get into this number 1 through 5 right here, give you a clue about deer bedding. Deer bedding is best when you look at your overall canopy. And let's say switchgrass, that's a canopy at 7-8 feet. Conifer, let's say that's a canopy at 30, 40, 50 feet, something like that. Hardwoods could be 80, 90 feet. Tall shrubs could be 12 feet tall. The best bedding areas, I've said this before for years, have uneven canopy, where they're going from 80-foot tall hardwoods, mature hardwoods, down to 10-foot regeneration, up to 12-foot shrubs, down to 6 to 7 to 8-foot high grasses, down to 3-foot briars, back up to middle height conifers. When you have an uneven canopy, that is always the best bedding habitat. And I have a video coming out, the top 10 worst bedding areas or worst type of deer habitat in general. And a lot of them are more monoculture. For example, people take, this is a general forestry practice. We want to improve the oaks because oaks are great for wildlife, right? They attract everything all from all around. That's not true. Oaks are very, very limited food source, and big oak trees that produce a lot of acorns don't have cover. So let's say you select cut those oaks. And if they're old, mature oaks, they can be susceptible to wind damage and blow over. So it's really a tough, complex situation even with oak trees. You can't have the single overstory of high oaks and then have great bedding down below unless you're really pocket cutting out those oaks, leaving dominant future oak trees for future mass production, maintaining a certain level of healthy, mature canopy oak trees. But even then, you're going to end up with a diverse canopy. You're going to have clear-cut areas. You're going to have high areas of canopy and mature oaks. Number 1 of my favorites, and this is a really cool thing, and of course, location is key, where food's at, where your access is at. There's a lot more to consider for a good bedding area than just the habitat. Unfortunately, far too many people look at it like if I do a bedding area, create a bedding area this way, build a bedding area this way, then it's going to be a great bedding area. But if it's in the wrong location, it could hurt you way more than it can help you. No different than a quality food plot located in the wrong spot. What I like about switchgrass, upland, explosion areas is switchgrass is a monoculture. But let's be honest, native grass blends, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, that's a monoculture too. It's still all grass. There's no food component. And when you're looking at supporting wildlife, whether it's deer, pheasant, rabbits, critters, birds, bees, butterflies, you want to have a daytime browse component and you want to have the cover. Unfortunately, if you have a lot of browse, if you try to just one general mix, if you have enough cover, there's not going to be enough daytime browse and food. Pollinator blends, whatever it might be. If you have enough pollinator blend and you have enough browse, then you're not going to have enough cover. So the two are different. And that's why a lot of pheasant mixes fail. Because if they have enough browse and food source during the summer, then there's not enough cover to sustain that population during the winter. That's why people replant them every single spring. It's almost like a gimmick. You see this happening over and over again. What I like about switchgrass, and you can extend this to native grass plantings down in more southern areas, and I mean southern areas where it starts to that line where it starts to be effective would be, say, Missouri, southern Illinois, southern Ohio, southern Indiana, over into southern Pennsylvania, maybe West Virginia, Oklahoma. You can plant native grass blends that actually, because the winter times are not that severe and you don't get that heavy snow to push those native grasses down, then they provide sustainable cover all winter long. And that's the key. When you're in central Wisconsin, maybe even southern Wisconsin, southern Michigan, over into Pennsylvania and New York, you need cover that can stand up all winter long. And those are some big whitetail states, and you're going to get away with switchgrass, and that's it. But if you plant just solid switchgrass for your deer bedding and wildlife cover, that's a bad thing. Because again, you go back to there's not enough pollinator blend, daytime browse, and food. What I like is you take a field. Could be that the field is 10 acres. Could be that it's 50. You're taking 40 to 50% in switchgrass. If it's a large field, you can cut that down to 25 or 30. You're going to surround that field so that field is protected. And then you're going to place pockets or screening lines in pockets, a variety, which we have out here. We actually have screening lines and pockets. And then we have actually screening on the outside because of the hills. But you're using the switchgrass solid, 8 to 10 pounds per acre, very heavy. And you can look up how to plant switchgrass for whitetail, for wildlife, and all my videos come up at the top of YouTube. And there's lots of different ways to plant that. I even have that for bedding area, switchgrass bedding area, a category on my playlist on YouTube. You can look that up too. But you're planting that not so the deer bed inside the switchgrass, you're planting it so they bed on the edge. Whitetails are creatures of edge. Pheasants will dive and hide and be protected from birds of prey. Rabbits too. And then on the inside of those areas, so let's say you have that complete field surrounded in switchgrass, and it's 20 feet wide, 30 feet wide. If you only have a 1 acre area, maybe you want it 20 feet wide. If you have a 40 acre area, maybe you want it 30, 40 feet wide so you can get in and out and not spook those deer. You have pockets in the inside of switchgrass. You could have lines on the inside of switchgrass, but in that protected area, that pocket in between, you're going to have about 50% in switchgrass, 40%. If it's a large area, cut it down to 30%. And the rest can be early successional growth, or you can do what I'm doing on my property in Minnesota is I'm planting pollinator blends so that I have that ultimate type of cover for birds, bees, butterflies, and pheasants. We already have tons of rabbits on the property. The switchgrass will explode that even more. But we want to have pheasants. We don't have switchgrass that's tall enough on the property right now. We have some that planted this year that got up to 4 feet tall, some other stuff that got about 2 feet. Next year it'll be 7, 8 feet tall. But we're going to complement those switchgrass plantings that are long and narrow with long lines of pollinator blends so we can have that ultimate 1-2 punch when it comes to daytime browse all winter long, all summer long, and then also the ultimate cover that actually stands up to the winters that we have all through the winter, except for the heaviest and worst of snows, which again, when you get down into those southern Midwest areas, you don't have to worry about. So you're taking switchgrass, upland explosion. I can't tell you how many clients that have had native grass blends that were extremely ineffective. I can think of Bill, Central Michigan. He's even made some comments lately on YouTube, and I've talked about him before. He had lots of native grass blends when I first went there, maybe 7 years ago, 6 years ago. We converted all that to switchgrass areas, moved conifers into those areas, and then on the inside added switchgrass pockets, lines, early successional growth, just like we're talking about. What was crazy is he didn't plant any pheasants. All of a sudden, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, some pheasants started popping up. a year ago last summer, it would have been the summer of 2018, he let me know that he saw 7 pheasants that day. They heard like 4 roosters that night. It was really cool. And then this year, the pheasant population is exploding. He didn't add any pheasants to that. It's just that he provided the cover that they seek, which is that solid switchgrass. Again, if that cover is laying down all winter long, it's no good for anything, let alone deer, pheasants, rabbits. So think about that ultimate blend of switchgrass and explosion. It's really easy to do, and it can be the #1 bedding. And what's cool about that, called upland, because upland, again, it features that very diverse canopy, very high quality wildlife cover for many different wildlife species, including deer. It's at best. So imagine you have early successional growth, pollinator pockets, switchgrass. You might have some clusters of conifer growing, some hardwood, briars. You get outstanding cover for a lot of different wildlife species, including whitetails. And really, if you have that open ground to do so and convert, it can be quickly. And I'm talking 2 to 3 years, because switchgrass will be tall enough to have some type of cover within a year for rabbits and pheasants, but within 2 growing seasons, then you'll have enough to actually sustain whitetail population, because you look out into that field, you can't see it. You can't see it, they're hidden. Early successional growth can take 25 years. It's a really cool buzzword, and natural regeneration. But if it takes 25 years to actually provide enough cover out there to hold deer, you can see on this property right here, it hasn't been farmed since the 50s, and there's not enough cover there other than our switchgrass out there to hold anything. It's just that poor soil hasn't converted to anything. #2, mature canopy reduction. This is pretty easy, because if you have an open wood lot and you want deer to bed in a certain area, then you're going in there in pockets or lines and area. You're taking a mature tree, and I'm looking at, it could be mature ash that's still alive somewhere, mature birch, mature maple, mature shagbark hickory, even mature oak that looks ugly, gnarled, is a subordinate to dominant mass-producing trees around it. You take those trees and you cut them and drop them. What's cool about that, you can reduce a lot of canopy all at the same time, so you get sunlight coming in at different angles and different pockets, and then the top and log provides cover too. And a lot of times my recommendation to clients is to safely drop and cherry pick the best trees that you can drop the easiest and the safest, and you do that every 40-50 yards in an open wood lot. Let's say you had 40 acres, you wanted to do this in 18 acres. You're not cutting an overall huge amount of trees, but you're getting sunlight coming in at all angles all the way throughout that 18 acres out of 40, and that becomes your general bedding area and holding cover improvement on the parcel. You're doing, again, you don't want one tree dropping on the other, because then you make a big triangle where deer can't go inside. They don't want it, they feel trapped. Then you have to cut out the logs, because that happens when you're cutting trees. You think it's going that way and it doesn't. But you're getting those trees down. If they happen to drop in each other, cut the logs out so the deer can go around the tops and can still get through there, and you're not clogging up the entire woods. And that's one of the worst bedding habitats. You just drop 5 acres on top of each other and call it a good bedding area, and that couldn't be further from the truth, because deer can't utilize it. You know, it might be good for rabbits or something, but that's about it. So mature canopy reduction, great way on an open mature wood lot to take down the undesirables, the weak, the multi-forked, trunked, and you're dropping that on the ground. You're getting regeneration because the sunlight's hitting the ground, so you're producing side cover. You're immediately giving side cover because you have the top and the log down, and that's one way, you know, a good way, just general timber stand improvement to create that. Worst thing you can do in that case is hack and squirt or girdle those trees and just let them lay there. Deer avoid those areas when trees are dropping. They're not stupid. They're not going to bed in an area where trees can drop at any minute. They know that. And I've seen popples that have been, you know, unfortunately negligent is almost a good word. I've seen that in a 40-acre parcel in Michigan where someone did that. Tree almost dropped on my good friend and client Frank when he's working on his tractor out there. Those trees were dropping for 1 to 3 years. So is high risk cutting, but you're cutting girdled poplar trees that are 14, 16 inches in diameter that are already half dead, and trying to get those on the ground safely so they don't drop on a friend's head or client's head. So I've seen that happen. Really poor practice. Cut those trees. Not to mention, you want that 7,000 shoots per acre of that popple to explode. Mature canopy reduction, you can see conifer. That's one thing. Number 2, 3, and 4 here. Add 50 to 100 conifers per acre. Put them back in those tops and debris of fully cut tops, so they're not regenerating, not providing shade, but they're providing protection with all the branches and debris, keep them out of the reach of the hungry mouths of deer that see that little green sprig sticking up above the snow. And you could have great diversity going forward, transforming a hardwood, total hardwood, open canopy, open forest structure into good hardwood regeneration and conifer pockets area. And then in 10-12 years you can cut that regeneration down again and complete the process for having specific bedding areas in a specific location if you want to do so. Hinge cuts, great to do. Hinge cuts I recommend on 25% of all parcels, 30% depends on the year, but I'd say more 20-25%. Depending on if you have that pole timber size, especially maple, you're not cutting conifer, you're not cutting poplar that way, but white oak, red oak, shagbark hickory, ash, they all make for great hinge cuts. The thing about hinge cuts, you're doing them in specific locations. You could be making travel corridors with them, so you cut them to the outside where you expect the deer to move. You connect the dots from bedding to feeding or bedding to bedding. And then certainly in those specific bedding areas, hinge cuts be a great way, a great tool to use to create specific bedding areas. And the cool thing about that, you can add conifers to it again, 50 to 100 per acre, matching, a lot of times, I'd say in the Midwest area, white spruce, white pine is a great shade tolerant conifer too. Norway spruce is more for open. People get in a debate, what's better, white spruce or Norway spruce? Well, Norway spruce, good soil out in the open. White spruce, poor soils, any soil, back in the shade. And let the habitat and the conditions tell you which one to plant and which is best. Hinge cuts, you can add conifer too, but the cool thing about hinge cuts is you can maintain them indefinitely for decades to come. So you get growth on top of the hinge cuts, they become 2-3 inches in diameter, cut them down again, even tie them down. And you can maintain those hinge cut areas indefinitely as specific bedding areas. And that's why I don't like timber rotations on various large parcels or anything like that, because you want to say this is a bedding area, this relates to this food source, this bedding area, my access, these tree stand locations, and you want to maintain that for decades to come, and you can do that with hinge cuts. Don't ever listen to if someone says that hinge cut's not a viable tool in the toolbox of habitat management, they don't have enough experience to be giving that advice, because they are. It's just not appropriate, as some say, for every property. So there's certainly a balance with all of this. And again, trying to define what fits for the given habitat. Number 4, clear cut areas. This is an area where you have timber harvest coming in. And what's really cool, out of all this, if you can have a logger or a forester take care of the timber for you, that's best, because it lowers the risk of cutting yourself, and it reduces a lot of manpower that you would have had to otherwise do. And so clear cut areas can be those total bedding areas where you want this bedding area on this knoll in this location, so you're making a clear cut. And the timber harvesters are coming out, instead of a general TSI or select cut on a property, which is typical, you're saying, I want this 1 or 2 acre in this location, clear cut. Let's say you had 80 acres. You might have 10 areas that are 1 to 2 acres that you're saying, this I want clear cut. Then you have, say, 60 acres remaining that would be, or 70, 75, or 65 acres out of 80 that's remaining. You might say 55 acres are just general select cut. So that would be typical timber. You're going to improve the value. And then 7 to 10 acres, you might get another cutting. And so you're maintaining a little bit higher regeneration value and browse value for deer during the day. And then the remaining 10%, 5%, 10 acres, 5 acres you're using for mature timber that you're not cutting, or you're very select cutting, so that you actually improved the amount of overall area that doesn't have cover, so that you can use it for access and downwind blockers for your tree stand locations. That's the best overall timber. Instead of just a select cut that someone would say, a forester would say, we need to do this on this 80-acre select cut. You want clear cut pockets. You don't want those areas you have to walk through. You want those in hidden bedding areas. You want them to relate to other bedding areas and movements to food plots. And then where you're moving as a hunter, you want more mature timber. And then that inside core area that might represent 50% of your parcel, say 40 out of 80, 45 out of 80, you're making those select cuts, so you improve the overall carrying capacity of the land. You're letting the logger do it, where it's safe. You're defining where the areas are select cut. You're defining where the bedding area is. You're defining where the mature timber is. And that's a great way, with just an overall general, hardwood timber focus of not only maintaining timber value and getting some dollars back in your pocket, but actually slanting it towards whitetail. And that's another way, another type of cutting where you could add conifers certainly to those clear cut areas while they're open and exposed to the sun. You don't care if those conifers, like a shade tolerant white pine or white spruce, is 8 feet tall in 12 years. It's providing side cover now, effective side cover, and that's 50% of bedding area is making sure there's enough side cover. And then finally, conifer cutouts. So sad. There's areas, 100 acres down in Missouri or southern Iowa where they have red cedar eradication programs, and they're actually taking all the red cedar out, and then they're planting hardwood tubes. And here you had a base form of cover. Red cedar is a base form of cover, so is switchgrass, so are conifers, so are shrubs, so is hardwood regeneration. So what you're doing to address the monoculture is no different than if you're taking switchgrass and then you're making 50%, 60% in early successional growth pockets and diversity blends. You're doing the same in those conifer pockets. Instead of knocking out the conifers or harvesting every other one, which is a bad practice, you're going in and removing 50, 60% of those conifers in lines and pockets where you need it the most for deer to bed. No different than if you're making clear-cut pockets in the hardwoods or adding diversity pockets in switchgrass. You want to have that hardwood regeneration, and then you're going back to making those conifers don't grow. So you take that standard red cedar, you cut out 50, 60% lines, pockets that fit with that effective hunting and whitetail program, and then you're cleaning it up basically and making it so deer can actually live there, have hardwood regeneration, spot spraying out the grasses or conifer that grow in, because that's just another form of base cover that has no browse value. Now you have hardwood regeneration, briars. You can add to that if you want. They have red osier dogwood, various shrubs. Briars are great. Hardwood regeneration, popple, hybrid poplar. There's a lot of things you can add to pockets of hardwood regeneration to add a food component and food value. Great time to add oaks if you want to, but oaks are just a small part of mast and browse for the entire year. If you have hardwood regeneration all winter long, deer will flock there and herd up. If it's acorns and oaks and open, they're going to leave that area. So a big difference. Think about those two extremes. So those to me, those middle three, number 2, 3, 4, mature canopy, hinge cuts, clear cut. Look at adding 50 to 100 trees per acre in those areas of conifer, hiding them back in the tops and debris so deer don't nip them and kill them. And but those would be my top 5 ways to build deer bedding. Sometimes we're using 2 or 3 in the same location. Sometimes we're using 3 or 4 on the same property. And those represent some of those really good diverse properties. So again, there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to creating great bedding areas. And oh, by the way, if you're hunting public land, go look for this. The more you can find all of this taking place in one spot, add in some elevation changes, some wetlands, you can find deer. You will find deer, especially on public land where there tends to be more of a monoculture of habitat, big hardwoods managed, whatever it might be. Get these happening on private land, find it on public land, and you'll find some great bedding areas for this off season and into next year, whether you're creating it and building it yourself on private land and doing it the right way, making sure it's out of your hunter access, making sure it's out of your downwind of stand locations, or you're actually trying to find it on public land. 5 great ways to build deer bedding or even find it this off season. Maybe you still have some hunting left. Look for these locations, find it, and you can get into some of the best whitetail bedding area habitat where you hunt or where you scout this season.
Now my web class for designing your whitetail parcel is just not about deer habitat, it's how to design your hunt too. You can't design one without the other. I'd like you to design a complete plan this off season so you can go into next season ahead of the game and find the greatest potential of success for your investment into your whitetail parcel this fall.